وصلى الله على نور كزو شد نور پیدا زمین از هو به او ساکن فلک.
So one of the things that we do in the Kalimi Sufi order is called the Khatam. And the Khatam means a seal. And it really comes from the seal ring that a king used to wear. They used to have a special carved ring that he would use as a stamp into wax or anything that he was sealing. People used to seal letters or seal treasures, like a lock on a treasure box would be sealed with wax, and only somebody with authorization from the king could open it. We use this word khatam as a seal for a symbol for reciting all the names of the teachers in our lineage, going from the Prophet Muhammad all the way down to the present. And when one recites all of that, there's a special blessing to reciting their names and acknowledging their memories and keeping alive the teachings that have passed down over many generations. And every time we read that in a communal setting, we call it the Khatam. Of course, Hazrat Inayat Khan also wrote a set of poems in English that his community cherishes, and one of those poems is called the Khatam. But that is used in a slightly different meaning, so I don't want people to get confused. And when we recite this, we do it on special occasions, like the death anniversary of important teachers in our lineage. We recite two of the lineages. As I said earlier, the Kalimi lineage, it consists of the Chishti order, the Qadri order, the Naqshbandi order, and also the Suhrawardi order. And of these four, the two really important ones for us are the Chishti order and the Qadri order. And so we recite the litany of the Chishti teachers and also the litany of the Qadri teachers. And normally we would do this in Urdu. In India, my teacher always used to read a poem that gives all of their names in the proper order in Urdu. But since we do this now in Atlanta, and not everybody is speaking Urdu, we do it in English. And so I created the same kind of poem in English, and I'll read that for you. So this is the chain of initiation in the Chishti Sufi order, in our Kalimi lineage. O God, by your essence, by your divine might, illumine us by way of Muhammad's light. I am yearning and bound by love's shackles, by way of Imam Ali, remove all my obstacles. I seek intercession by name of Hassan Basri and Abdul Wahid, leader of the folk of eternity. By way of Fuzail ibn Ayaz, a thief who loved wisdom, and Ibrahim ibn Adam, who gave up his kingdom. Have mercy on us by way of Huzaifa from Basra, and his friend, the guide on our way, Hubayra. By way of Mimshad, let our hearts be embellished, and Abu Ishaq, the Syrian, who taught the masters in Chisht. Then by way of our master, Abu Ahmed Abdal, who with Nasir Abu Yusuf left all things banal. With Khwaja Mawdud, star of impoverished love, and Haji Sharif Zindani, the living treasure trove. By the four-cornered cap worn by Haji Usman Haruni, the world was renounced by the masters Chishti. Then Muinuddin Ajmeri, ruler of India and beyond, who aids those who call him beyond worldly bond. Then Qutbuddin, who with resignation's knife, while listening to music, gave his precious life. By Fariduddin Ganje Shakar, make into sugar our salt. By God's beloved Nizamuddin Awliya, forgive our fault. By way of Nasiruddin Chiragh, enlighten our hearts, with Kamaluddin Alama, master of mystical arts. By way of Sirajuddin, fill the dark world with light. By way of Ilmuddin, make ignorance take flight. Let Maudud Rajan incite love from his home in Gujarat, and let Jamaluddin Jaman make beautiful our thought. Followed by Khwaja Hassan and Muhammad Chishti, and he who left for Medina in love, Yahya Medani. He trained Kalimullah, master of heart and book, who charmed Nizam of Aurangabad with just a look, who adopted Fakhruddin, lover of prophets, advisor of kings, by way of Qutbuddin Muhammad, who left worldly things. Followed by Nasiruddin Kalimian, the dark saint, advisor to the poet Ghalib, and Delhi's king without restraint. From Baghdad and Medina came Muhammad Hassan Jilani, to India to join the Chishtis and take the name Kalimi. His light has lit 2 lamps that glow in this world's dark. Abu Hashim Madani and Ziaul Hassan caught his spark. Inayat Khan traveled far to spread the Chishti light, while Fakhrul Hassan Kalimi kept the foundation tight. His son Rashidul Hassan Kalimi seeks divine aid, and never from the Chishti Nizami Kalimi path strayed. O God, as long as earth may revolve and sun may shine, let us light the lamp of love and drink the Chishti wine. And so this lineage goes all the way from the Prophet Muhammad's light through all of the teachers that followed him, to Muinuddin Chishti and all the Chishtis after him, to Sheikh Kalimullah Shah Jahanabadi and all of the Kalimi Chishti teachers after him, all the way to my teacher, Pir Rashid Kalimi, who gave me this lineage. And with each generation we can add a new couplet to the poem and make it a little bit longer as the lineage continues on into the present, as that rolls into the future. So this chain of initiation begins with the Prophet Muhammad, and so the first couplet is dedicated to him. O God, by your essence, by your divine might, illumine us by way of Muhammad's light. The teaching that's wrapped up in this couplet is that the Prophet Muhammad is both a person and a light. We call it the Nur-e Muhammadi, the light of Muhammad. And by that we don't mean that he came into the world and had a body, and because he was an enlightened soul he then gave off light. No, it's reversed. So that he came into this world as a body because he had been in primordial times light. And I guess at that point we can't even say he was light, it's just that a light was that over time became him. And we believe that that same light, the light of Muhammad, the Nur-e Muhammadi, is inside of every prophet that came from Adam, the very first human being, all the way down through all of the prophets to Muhammad. That's what made each of these people an extraordinary person and a prophet, is not just that they heard God speaking and transmitted that message to the people, but that's outside. Inside, they were recovering the light, which is really their essence, getting away from the body, refining the soul, and realizing the soul is a manifestation of the spirit, which is light. And so we very often talk about the Prophet Muhammad not as a person, but as the light. And so in this first couplet, O God, by your essence, by your divine might, illumine us by way of Muhammad's light. It mentions Muhammad not as a person, but as a kind of light. And that's also how we understand that when the Prophet died, which he did, in a particular place at a particular time, he's buried, there's a grave, you can go and visit it in Medina. But just because his body was gone doesn't mean that he is gone. His presence continues, we believe. And it continues as a kind of light of guidance and a light of teaching that other people can transmit in this world. And that's the idea of the initiation. So the Prophet Muhammad gave the first Sufi initiation to his son-in-law, who was his cousin, Ali ibn Abi Talib. We call him Hazrat Ali, or his great honor, Ali. And Ali's name really means the lofty one. Ali means like somebody who's very, very up above everyone else. So his name was also his character. He had a very lofty character. He was a great spiritual teacher and a great warrior also. And a great supporter of the Prophet Muhammad. He was the first male to convert to Islam and join the new religion when the Prophet began to teach. Of course, the first Muslims were all women. People don't know that anymore. But the first man was his cousin Ali, who was a young guy, 14 years old at the time, who took great risks becoming a Muslim at the time because it was not an easy thing to do. It was a persecuted group in the beginning. But Ali was the personification of bravery. And so the second couplet in this lineage is dedicated to Ali because the Prophet Muhammad gave initiation to Ali, taught him how to do zikr, and transmitted to him something of that light that was the Prophet's cosmic inheritance. So even when the Prophet was gone, Ali was there. And through these initiations, a bit of that light is passed on into later generations. I am yearning and bound by love's shackles, by way of Imam Ali, remove all my obstacles. And again, the people who are reciting this poem are praying to God for various blessings in the name of these great teachers. So here, in the name of Imam Ali, O God, remove all obstacles from my way. We call him Imam Ali. Imam means somebody who stands in front. It means a leader. And when Muslims gather for prayer, one person has to stand in front as the leader, and everybody behind will then follow that person so that everyone can maintain unity. And that same principle followed in the early Muslim community, that somebody who was an imam was not just leading in prayer, but also the community had to have a leader. And there were, of course, conflicts in the early Muslim community when the Prophet Muhammad died as who would be the leader of the community. Some people felt that Ali was the best for that job. Others felt that he was too young and that an elder of the community would be a better choice. And so this was the origin of a split or a divide in the community between Sunnis and Shia Muslims. It gets very complicated and we don't have to go into all of the details. But there were some people who called themselves Shia who believed that Ali was the only rightful leader of the community. There are others who call themselves Sunnis who believe that Ali was great, but the community could decide on its own leader and it decided on somebody else in the beginning. In any case, everybody in the community admired Ali as the most brave, the most wise, the most knowledgeable, the person from the community who was closest to the Prophet in character. And so even people who didn't recognize him as the first leader of the community recognized him as a great teacher and leader of the community. And that's why we call him Imam Ali. Some people hear that and they think that we're Shia Muslims because they also call Ali the Imam. But even though my teachers have all been Sunni, we still call him Imam Ali or Hazrat Ali to indicate his spiritual greatness, even if he wasn't the political leader of the community right after the Prophet died. So the third couplet, which is the third generation of this teaching, some of the couplets have two people in them, so they're actually the third couplet, but it's the third and fourth generation. We could economize a little bit. And this one says, I seek intercession by name of Hassan Basri and Abdul Wahid, leader of the folk of eternity. So here we have two names, Hassan Basri, Hassan of Basra, and Abdul Wahid. Hassan of Basra was a very famous man. He was a great theologian, one of the greatest preachers in the early Islamic community, and he was from Basra, which is that old town in Iraq. It's now part of the nation of Iraq. It's kind of a town that's on the Persian Gulf, I think. And Hassan of Basra was a great Islamic thinker and preacher, and he saw the Muslim community turn from a very tight, small group of people in Medina into a worldwide empire that controlled vast amounts of resources, a large army, and some people in the Muslim community became very wealthy and powerful. And Hassan of Basra was one of the people who said to the Muslims, listen, you're turning into an empire, but that's not the original teaching of the Prophet Muhammad. So be careful of the money, of the wealth, of the fame that you're earning in the world. And don't let yourself be caught up in worldly ambitions. Turn inward. And that's a basic Sufi teaching, maybe a basic teaching of all mystical traditions inside every religion, is that turn your attention from the outward into the inward in order to keep your heart pure. Hassan of Basra was one of the theologians in the early Islamic community who taught this publicly. It's also said that he wanted to marry the great female Sufi, Rabia of Basra. Now, they came from the same town, right? Hassan Basri and Rabia Basri. They both have the same last name, you could say, because they came from the same town of Basra. But we don't know for sure that they met each other and lived in the same era. But there are many, many folk stories, and they're beautiful Sufi teaching stories. We still love to tell them because whether or not they happened historically, they're a great teaching vehicle. There's one story that Rabia of Basra was out in the wilderness, and she used to go on long jaunts in the desert to get away from the town and away from society and all the demands that were there. And so she was out in the wilderness sitting in the desert, and the birds were in the trees, and the animals, the gazelles from the desert, were coming out and putting their head on her knee and listening to her speak. And then along comes Hassan of Basra, who came out to see her. He wanted to have discussions with her and debates. And as soon as he got close, all of the birds flew away, and all the gazelles jumped up and sprang and hid behind the sand dunes. And so he approached her and he said, Rabia, how is it that you're sitting here and all of the animals come close to you, but as soon as I come, they fly away? She said, well, what did you eat for breakfast? He said, I ate very little. He was a very ascetic guy. He prided himself on self-control. He said, I ate very, very little. She said, what exactly did you eat? He said, just a few onions sliced, fried in fat. She said, that's why they fled away. So there are a lot of apocryphal stories like this of Hassan of Basra meeting Rabia of Basra and having debates. Usually Rabia of Basra shows herself to be a little bit spiritually insightful over Hassan of Basra and ends up teaching him some important wisdom. And in a way, these two figures, Hassan of Basra and Rabia of Basra, represent that masculine search for God and a feminine search for God, if we can use those gender binaries. Rabia usually has some kind of surprising deep wisdom, and Hassan relies on self-control and asceticism and a more intellectual, rational grappling with problems. Between the two of them, when they come together, they share something that the other lacks, and they usually make up for each other's faults. There are very beautiful stories about those people. But of course, you may have noticed in our Sufi lineage, all of the teachers are men. And this was a custom from the very early days that only men would receive an initiation that they could pass on to others. And so we don't have Rabia of Basra recorded as teaching other people or giving initiations into a Sufi order. We don't have a Sufi order named after her. She doesn't appear as a key transmitter in any of the Sufi orders that we have, whereas Hassan of Basra does. So it's nice, even though Hassan's name appears in lineage, to always remember that he's paired with Rabia. And several of the figures in our Chishti order have that kind of very strong relationship to a female family member or teacher, even though the females' names are not preserved in the lineage itself. Then the fourth couplet says, by way of Fuzail ibn Ayaz, a thief who loved wisdom, and Ibrahim ibn Adam, who gave up his kingdom. And again, in this couplet, there are two personalities. One is Fuzail ibn Ayaz, and the other is Ibrahim ibn Adam, and they're both very famous characters. Fuzail ibn Ayaz was he was a thief in his early life, a brigand. He would rob people on the highway to steal money from them. And one day he robbed a caravan, and he found that there was a young man, a young boy in the caravan, maybe 13, 14 years old. And so all the people in the caravan, and of course, as I mentioned, the Islamic community had become a world empire by this time. You could travel in caravans from Spain all the way through Baghdad, all the way to India on the Indus River and back. And so long distance trade was thriving. Gold and silver currency, international banking was started in this context. There were people transmitting money and good fortunes across the world. And so it was a great time to be a robber and to hold up the caravans. So Fuzail ibn Ayaz and his gang, they held up a caravan and they said to everybody, give us all of your money. And so they found there was one boy who, when they came to him, they said, did you give up all your money? He said, well, here, I have gold coin that people didn't check. It was stuck in a secret pocket. And he gave it to Fuzail. And Fuzail said, well, why are you telling me that? It was in a secret pocket. You didn't have to tell me that. And the boy said, but God would know. And so Fuzail took all the money, and as he was leaving with his band, he said to them, you divide up the wealth, I don't need it. And he renounced the life of a robber, and he went off in the desert and repented, and eventually found a Sufi teacher, and with Abdul Wahid, and turned to the spiritual path. So that's why we call him a thief who loved wisdom. Even more famous is Ibrahim ibn Adham. He was a prince, actually, in Balkh. Balkh is a city that's, I think it's now in Afghanistan. It's way up in Central Asia. And it was a great city on the Silk Road, on the trade routes. And Mahayana Buddhism actually spread from India through Afghanistan to Balkh, and from Balkh to the wider Central Asian world and to China and all the way to Japan. So Balkh was a very famous city for trade and also in Buddhism. There was a big Buddhist stupa there in Balkh. Eventually all the people around Central Asia converted to Islam, and Buddhism was kind of lost as a Central Asian religion, but it was preserved in Tibet and Nepal and China and other parts of Asia. So Ibrahim ibn Adham was a prince in this kingdom from Balkh. And they say one day he was out hunting. He had a horse and a very fancy saddle, as a prince did. And he was hunting a deer or a rabbit. I'm not sure what animal it was. Maybe it was a rabbit in the story. And because his horse was so fancy and his saddle was so great and he was such a majestic prince, he could ride faster than his whole party, and he chased this deer until pretty soon he was alone in the forest. None of his helpers were around him. And he kept glimpsing this deer and going after it and going after it, and he wouldn't give up and he wouldn't give up. And finally he got exhausted and he was all alone in the forest. And then he heard a voice, and the voice was coming from the saddle horn of his saddle, and it said, "Oh Ibrahim, is this what you were created for?" And he thought he was going a little crazy. So he kept riding on looking for the deer, and again he heard the voice coming from his saddle saying, "Is this what you were created for?" And he heard it a third time, and he fell off of his horse, and he had this experience of paralysis, that all of his life he was trained to be a prince and to be a great hunter, to be a warrior, to have this single-minded focus of getting what he wants, whether that's a deer in the forest or the right marriage, expanding his kingdom. And now suddenly he was hearing this voice saying, "Was this what you were created for?" And so he went back to his kingdom, and he gave back his horse and his fancy saddle, and he said to his father, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to become the king of this kingdom." And off he went in search of wisdom. So he was a prince who gave up his kingdom, just like Fuzail ibn Ayaz was a thief who gave up his crime. There are a lot of stories of Ibrahim ibn Adham that the Chishti teachers like to tell. They love Ibrahim ibn Adham because he became a very ascetic guy. he gave up all of the luxuries of life. His story is a little bit like the Buddha's own story. As the Shakyamuni, as the prince from the Shakya clan, he was raised as a prince. He was going to become the king. He lived in luxury, and yet he experienced this crisis and then enlightenment, and he gave it all up. So some people think that maybe Ibrahim ibn Adham's story is based somehow loosely on the Buddha's own story because of that Buddhist heritage of the city of Balkh where he was from. Nizamuddin Aulia, the great Chishti teacher, used to tell a story about Ibrahim ibn Adham. They said that he was out in the wilderness and it was very, very cold. It was in the winter. And so he was hiking through the snow and the sun was setting and he was looking for some place to take shelter, and he found a small dark cave, and he decided, okay, that's a good place for me to spend the night and get out of the cold. So he went into the cave and he tried to go to sleep. But as he was falling asleep, he was shivering from the cold. And he reached out to see what else was in the cave, and he felt like a leather hide. And he thought, oh, this is very good. It's like an animal hide. I can curl up in this like a blanket and survive the cold. And so he said, thank God for this leather blanket. And he curled up in it and he went to sleep. And he didn't die from the cold. And then when the first rays of light came up and they shone in the cave and he looked around, he realized that he was in the cave of a dragon, and he'd curled up in its wing to keep himself warm. And when he saw the dragon, he was alarmed and he went running out of the cave. And then he stopped and he said, thank God that I saw it was a dragon and I got away. Just like thank God I didn't know it was a dragon and I curled up and stayed warm. And he heard a voice, the voice of God saying to him, "O Ibrahim, we saved you from danger, only with new danger."
फलक दर इश्क़ युशदा वसल्लल्लाहु